There are very few bands in this world who have been able to consistently change, innovate, and metamorphose for more than 40 years, non-stop. And even fewer with the ability to fill a stadium with 43,000 people in only their third year as a professional group. Today, we retrace the history of Japan's hardest working band. This is the legacy of Bucktick. Everything begins in the childhood home of Hisashi Imae in the prefecture of Gunma, 1983. His parents owned a convenience store that was attached to their home, which would become a hangout spot for the future members of Bucktick. A huge fan of Western music, specifically punk and electronic, the members would recount that whenever they would visit Imae, they would hear strange European music playing in the background. Some of this strange music that he would play were bands like Oingo Boingo, T-Rex, and Kraftwerk. Inspired by the melodies and chords that he heard within this music, he was then struck by the idea of forming a band with his friends Araki, whom would be the vocalist, Yutaka Higuchi, or Yuta, on bass, and himself on guitar. Eventually, Yuta would introduce his friend Hidehiko Hoshino, or Hide, to Imae, and after some convincing, he was added to the lineup as a second guitarist. The last to join the group was Atsushi Sakurai, whom, despite the fact that he had been in the same class as Imae for 2 years, had never spoken a word to him. As for why, it stated that Sakurai was a notorious rebel who hung out with delinquents and got into frequent trouble, until he decided that this path would lead him nowhere. When he was added to the roster, it was decided that he would be the drummer. Lots of time was then spent practicing their instruments, because up to this point, none of them knew how to play. Luckily, however, Yuta's older brother, Toru Yagami, had his own band at the time, SPOTS, which stood for Sex Pistols Secretly on Tour, an acronym that the Pistols used on a secret tour around England, but eventually this was shortened to just SP. And this meant that he and the other members of the group could pass on some of their knowledge to the young band. The bassist of SP was able to teach Yuta about his instrument, and their guitarist taught both Imae and Hide a few chords. And Toll was able to teach Sakurai how to hold a steady beat. By the beginning of 1984, Hisashi had decided to give the band a name, Hinangogo. Their first live performance would be at an amateur festival called Little Rock. Still very much inspired by punk, Hinangogo played only covers of the Japanese punk band Stalin. The band then came to an agreement. Let's wait until we all graduate high school and move to Tokyo. Then we'll begin playing seriously. Hisashi and Araki were the first to graduate, and the first to move, while the other three stayed in Gunma until they were able to rejoin the other members. Sakurai stated that this period of time was especially difficult and that he would drink every day and constantly fight with his parents because they refused to let him relocate to Tokyo. Hisashi and Araki would return on the weekends, however, to rehearse with the others. As time passed, Hisashi felt that Hinangogo was a name that no longer suited the evolution of the group. In a stroke of inspiration, he landed on the name Bakuchiku, which means firecracker in Japanese, but opted to go for an English spelling, thus birthing Bucktick. They would play as Bucktick for the first time in October 1984 at the Yamaha PopCon, short for Popular Song Contest. Come the following year, the remaining 3 members would relocate to Tokyo, with Sakurai being the last to join them. The beginning of the year would be fairly slow for the band, but on August 4th, 1985, they would make their live debut in Tokyo at the Shinjuku Jam. A beautiful start for the group, but this would mark the beginning of the end of their relationship with Araki, because following their second show at the Shinjuku Jam in November of '85, Araki was reluctantly removed from the band's lineup by Hisashi. The reasoning? Hisashi believed that Araki's voice no longer suited the new sound that the band was crafting, and Araki himself agreed to part ways peacefully with the group. Now left without a singer, the band commences their search for a new 5th member. Sakurai at this point begins to question his role in the group. Up until this moment, he had been their drummer. However, he had absolutely no desire nor inspiration to play the drums, not to mention that he believed he had no skill with this instrument. He knew deep within his soul that he wanted to sing. Hisashi was initially thrown off by this sudden development and denied his request. Determined to have his way, however, Sakurai then decides to speak with Toll in hopes that he would have some advice to share, but once again was discouraged and told to remain the drummer. This time, as confirmed by Sakurai himself, he decided to speak with the singer Kyosuke Himuro of Bowie, a famous band that as well originated in Gunma, and was told that, in fact, yes, you should become the vocalist. Absolutely adamant and still refusing to give up, Sakurai states his intentions once more and Hisashi finally concedes. But it's here where a different problem arises. Who will be the drummer? Luckily, they're already super close with Toll, and his band, SP, had broken up a month earlier in October, and it was now Yuta's job to convince his brother to join the group. But he initially refuses, stating that he's given up on music, but as well, he concedes after being spoken to by his brother, and would join the band in November of '85. Inspired by Carols, a band that you would know about if you saw my video on the Rockabillys, and once again, Western music, Yagami Toll added a level of depth that was missing from the group's live performances due to their lack of a professional drummer, and the quality of their sound improved drastically. Rehearsals were frequent, and live shows were equally as frequent. Come 1986, the band would play at least one show a month and subsequently became very popular in Japan's independent music scene. In May, they had managed to accumulate enough money to afford a studio session and record a demo tape comprised of their original tracks, Plastic Syndrome 2, To Search, One Night Ballet, and Secret Reaction. And in June of '86, after playing a show in Shibuya, they were approached by the head of indie record label Taiyo Records, who would later sign them to the label in the following month of July. By mid-January '87, Bucktick had commenced work on the recording of their debut independent album, which was completed only 2 weeks later on February 4th, and which later released on April 1st. The album was titled Hurry Up Mode, and was released on both CD and vinyl, being the first ever independent album in Japan to be released on CD, with the CD also containing 2 hidden tracks, Vacuum Dream and No No Boy, 2 songs written from when they were Hinan Gogo. The release of this album was quickly followed with a live performance on its release day titled Bucktick Gensho, or Bucktick Phenomenon, and then by their first ever tour, which they embarked on the 13th of May, 1987. Due to the fact that they were still fairly underground, they didn't have the funds to afford proper touring equipment, and the tour van that they were traveling was fairly beaten up and often unreliable. And in one story, Yuta recounts the time where they ran out of gas and the band had to push it 1 whole kilometer with Mount Fuji just in view. Their focus on playing live allowed them to grow rapidly in popularity, and quickly they became the object of desire for many major labels. A certain Junichi Tanaka of Invitation Records, a subsidiary of Victor/JVC, approached the band with an offer to have them signed. At first the band were hesitant, but they eventually accepted the offer, but not without first providing a contract with their own non-negotiables. 1. There would be absolutely no changes to the image of the band. 2. Nor any changes to the current lineup. 3. No usage of studio musicians, because this makes the process less organic. 4. The band will always be in charge of the production process. After drawing up this contract, they were officially signed to their first major label. Their days as an underground independent band were over. Following this, they would begin recording their debut big release during the months of July and August. And this album, entitled Sexual XXXXX, would be released November 21st, 1987. But before beginning the very busy year that was to follow in '88, they'd play their first real event as professionals called Rock and Roll Band, to the biggest crowd they received up to this point, nearly 5,000 people. The future seems bright for these young musicians, whom are already accustomed to the nearly endless work that it takes to uphold a group of this nature. Like mentioned earlier, the pace at which they would continue will only continue to augment. Come the start of the new year, they were once again in the studio, this time for the recording of their debut professional EP, Romanesque, which released on March 21st, 1988. Once more, their constant touring and promotion caused the group to, again, explode in popularity, allowing them to play nearly double the live shows that they had played the prior year. And as well, they consistently made appearances on both radio and television to promote their new work. By the end of the year, they totaled out to 60 appearances on both TV and radio. In between all of this, they returned to the studio from February to March to record their second LP, Seventh Heaven. Having to juggle live shows as well as recording, they performed at the Shiodome Pit on April 1st and sold out this venue of 3,000 people in only 2 hours. Keep in mind, this is way before the age of the internet, so for them to sell out a show on this scale in only their first year as a professional group was a true triumph. The Bucktick Shock Tour to promote the releases before Seventh Heaven would commence April 13th and finish around the end of July, and the group would end up playing 34 dates in total around Japan. Once finished with the tour, and with a brand new album which had just released, they played a few events and festivals in the month of August, but come September, it was once again time for the band to hit the studio, although this time, they would be embarking for London to record their upcoming record at Master Rock Studios, where many notable acts like Motorhead, Elton John, and Depeche Mode have also recorded. They also played a show at the Greyhound in Fulham, where tickets were rumored to have only been £2. The damp atmosphere of London, which according to Sakurai seemed much more open to the creation of darker, more somber music, had left a profound impression on the group, and by the end of their 1-month stay abroad, Atsushi longed for more time in England's grey capital. But they had to return, and on the way back, they realized that they were way ahead of the tour schedule. With their third major release finished, they hadn't even began to tour for Seventh Heaven, which released just 3 months earlier. They were quick to correct this, and on October 11th, the Seventh Heaven tour began, and would stretch until January the following year, lasting for 38 dates. And in between all of this, they would release their first major debut single, Just One More Kiss, on October 26th. Before finishing off their year, and as well as the tour, they had one final media appearance for the magazines Patti Patti and Patti Patti Rock and Roll. It is very important to note here that Hisashi has stated that following this shoot is when he would acquire for the first time a certain illicit material that would nearly destroy his and the band's career. For the final 2 dates of the Seventh Heaven Tour, the band would have the opportunity to play at the Nippon Budokan, one of the most iconic arenas in all of Tokyo. This would be their biggest show to date, as the Budokan is able to house a maximum of 15,000 spectators. Their third album, Taboo, was released not too long after this, on January 18th of 1989. This is, to date, their only album to ever be fully recorded outside of Japan. This album as well would be the first stepping stone for the band, as they started to mature into their sound and create deeper musical atmospheres. Scottish singer Owen Paul had produced this album, and according to the band, had taught them plenty of new things about recording professionally that they didn't know beforehand. Starting February 9th, the band would have their first proper break since 1987, when they had started ceaselessly touring and promoting. This only lasts a few weeks, however, as they recommenced touring just a month later to promote Taboo. Scheduled to play all the way up until May 30th, however, this tour was cut short. Haneda Airport, April 21st, 1989. Hisashi Imai is apprehended by police. Absolute chaos. Where is he? What's happening? Hide and Toll are the first to receive notification by phone call. Turn on the TV, now! It was everywhere in bold letters. Imai Hisashi, arrested for possession of LSD. To us, this may not seem like such a big deal. Rock stars are known for their debauchery and consistent use of illicit drugs, but being caught with illegal substances in Japan is the near equivalent of career suicide. Many artists never recover once it's exposed to the public. Not much is known or clear of what became of Hisashi in the 3 months that he was released from police custody. For most fans, this was seen as the potential end of the group, having heard absolutely nothing from Bucktick for 6 whole months. People naturally begin to speculate and worry. However, in October, the band reappeared with ads declaring that a new album was on the way and that a show was scheduled to be played in December. They would not be disbanding. Shortly after, in November, an interview with Hisashi was published in Rocket magazine, in which he apologizes for his actions and vows to never take the drug again. The band held through on their promise, and come December 29th, it was time for a brand new performance held at the Tokyo Dome, a professional baseball stadium with a max capacity of 50,000 people. Anxiously, the band wonders if anyone will show up at all. No one has ever recovered from a scandal this serious before. Astonishingly, Bucktick manages once again to fill every single seat in the stadium and delivers a legendary show, now dubbed The Day in Question, in reference to Imai's arrest, and has been held annually starting in 2001. It was here as well where they debuted 2 new tracks from their forthcoming album, Aku no Hana and The World Is Yours, a powerful end to the year for Japan's hardest working band. Not long after, the single Aku no Hana was officially released in January the following year. It's also important to note that Aku no Hana here means Les Fleurs du Mal, inspired by Sakurai's favorite poet at the time, Charles Baudelaire, and his collection of poems of the same name. The full album would follow soon after with a release on February 1st, and once more, it was followed by an extremely extensive tour, the most ambitious one that they've done up to this point, with 51 dates, at least one stop in every single prefecture in Japan. This album and Taboo would mark a real shift in the sound of the group, where before they had a more traditional Japanese pop rock style in their previous releases, these 2 albums had a much darker and almost gothic inspiration, possibly propagated by the fact that they worked with Will Gosling on these 2 records, who's engineered for artists such as the Psychedelic Furs and Echo and the Bunnymen. And of course, this album sees plenty of experimentation from the members, who are eager to finally be recording again. The Aku no Hana tour would end in July, and Bucktick would take a mini break before continuing their endless onslaught of live performances. Come the end of the year, they were once again in the studio to record an album. It seems that these 5 young men truly do not possess the ability to be fatigued, with this being the 3rd year of this absolute merciless schedule. January 21st, 1991, the single Speed is released, which pokes fun at the events that arose in '89. The track speaks about experimentation with drugs, from what I could gather and comprehend. Specifically pills, with the original title of the song being Acid, but it was later changed because this was deemed to be too scandalous. Shortly after, the album that they had began recording in September of the year prior is released on February 21st, titled Kurutatayo, Crazy Sun, and we once again saw the band embrace a more serious subject matter, with 2 songs, Jupiter and Sakura, being a tribute to Sakurai's mother, who passed away while he was away on tour a year prior. And as well, having said that the sun, that Tayo, was as well a metaphor for his mother, whom he said was a great being. Kuruta Tayo would also see more experimentation from the members, with Hisashi embracing more electronic elements. The tour for this record started on March 6, 1991 and lasted for 49 dates. Following the end of the tour, they would make a few television appearances to round out the year before entering the studio once again at the beginning of '92. This time, not for a brand new album, but a collection of re-recorded tracks entitled Koroshi no Shirabe, This Is Not Greatest Hits. The recording process for this album is said to be grueling, with about 1,300 hours spent in the studio tweaking, reworking, and re-recording these tracks in order to make them fit into their new style, with, as well, improved musicianship. During this year, they made the conscious choice to play less shows so that they could properly gear up for the album that was to follow in the upcoming year, embarking on the This Is Not Greatest tour, which lasted for 23 dates and ended the year with a brief break from touring. Commencing in May of '93, Bucktick announced a monstrously expansive tour for their upcoming album, Darker Than Darkness, Style 93, consisting of 59 shows in total, with the tour terminating in November. The largest tour that they've done in their history as a group. Their 7th major label album would include some noteworthy changes in comparison to their previous releases. For one, Hide would contribute piano and synthesizer parts in this album, and as well we would see Hisashi experiment with different guitar tones as well, most notably on the single Dress, where he emulates the sound of a keyboard. Most infamously, I believe, would be the inclusion of the hidden track DTD on the CD release, which apparently caused confusion among the public as to why they would include a song and not list it anywhere, with Sakurai even being interviewed specifically about this matter on a TV appearance. 1994, however, would see another unexpected change for the band, as this is the first year since their debut where they did not release a new studio album. The band did stay fairly active, however, with them consistently playing live shows, but not as many in the years preceding. They would, however, depart for a week-long photo shoot in Turkey, and would also play a small live show in Istanbul as well. Hisashi would also release the debut album from his side project, Shaft, this year. The album 6ix9ine would follow in the upcoming year, releasing on May 15th, 1995, once again with a tour that saw less dates than previous years, with the band potentially feeling the effects of their warp speed touring from prior years. This album contains the B-side, Rakuen, which ended up being censored because the band had used parts of the Quran without authorization, which caused the Islamic Center of Japan to protest its usage in the track, subsequently leading the band to revise this choice and remove its usage from the album. The last quarter of the year would end with them releasing a compilation of singles titled Catalog 1987 to 1995. Seemingly back to their regular release schedule, the band would release the album Cosmos in '96, this time coupled with a different look for the band. Instead of their usual dark attire, the group opted for a more classic look, with the group mainly sporting suits, and Toll specifically a zoot suit-inspired fedora, with his hair popping through the top. This as well was coupled with a musical style that was more inspired by electronic, marking Bucktick's shift into a more cyberpunk-influenced sound. And as expected, they set off for yet another tour, the Chaos Tour, this being their 11th major tour since their debut, but noticeably shorter than previous ones, only lasting about 23 days. To supplement for this, the band had decided to expand this tour for an extra 9 dates, beginning in December. However, misfortune would strike Sakurai once again, and these 9 dates would have to be cancelled. Whilst away in Nepal for a photo shoot, Sakurai had begun experiencing incredible abdominal pains, but him being the intensely dedicated man that he is, decided to ignore the pain for 6 whole hours during the shoot before politely asking to be taken to the hospital. Only one problem. Once upon arrival at the hospital, there was no space left. He would have to be rushed to Singapore and be operated on effective immediately. Sakurai, however, thinking to be in his final moments, pleaded to be taken to Tokyo. He thought, "If I am to die, let me die in Tokyo." Once in Tokyo, he underwent an operation for peritonitis and, miraculously, was told that if he had arrived only 1 day later, that he would have died. Following this harrowing event, both him and the band thought it necessary to take a proper break before resuming normal operations. Following this rest period, they would have yet another album prepared for release in '97. Not even the chilling hand of death is enough to threaten the dedication of Bucktick. This new album, Sexy Streamliner, was the first to be released under Mercury/Polygram after having just left Victor, and it would once again see the band lean into their actively forming cyberpunk sound, with Hisashi experimenting with a theremin on this album. Always ahead of the curve and never afraid to experiment, Bucktick once again succeeded in their adoption of a new style. The end of the century would be fairly quiet for the group, with them not releasing another album until September of 2000, making this the longest interlude between albums since their conception as a band. The release of the album One Life, One Death saw the band once again change labels, this time to BMG/Funhouse, which funnily enough is owned by Victor. 2 albums following this, Kyokuto I Love You and Mona Lisa Overdrive, would be the final times that the band would explore the sonics of cyberpunk before once again deciding to experiment with a new sound. The rest of the 2000s would see plenty of change for this ever-evolving group. 2004 specifically, with the group briefly halted for all members, discounting Hide, to release music for their respective side projects. Sakurai had lanced a solo career and released the album Ai no Wakusei. Imai formed the group Lucy with musicians Kiyoshi and Katsushige Okazaki, and released the album Rockarolica. And lastly, the brothers Toll and Yuta released albums with their respective groups, Yagami Toll in the Blue Sky and Wild Wise Apes. Come 2005, the band would once again experiment with the concept of a novel sound, and for the first time would base an album around the theme of goth, on the record of Jusankai wa Gekko, with a heavy emphasis on the atmosphere of cabarets, clowns, and gothic theater. Despite their already well-cultivated dark and gothic-leaning image, this would be the first time they would properly release an album in this style. Following this release, they would start exploring the style of a straight band sound, meaning a pullback on the gothic elements and more of a focus on the sound of a traditional group. All releases from 2005 to 2011 would follow this sound. The band was, once again, on a fairly consistent release schedule, seeing a new album followed by a tour annually or biennially. With the release of 8 new albums within this period, they would once again switch labels in 2012. The trajectory of the band had seemed to be going perfectly smoothly. Having just finished the tour for their latest release, Aizora, released the 12th of April, 2023, it appeared to be that Bucktick were truly an indestructible band. But, as it always is in life, the flames that burn the brightest always extinguish too quickly. October 19th, during a concert held exclusively for the members of Bucktick's fan club, Sakurai fell gravely ill during the performance and would sadly pass away later that same night, due to a brainstem hemorrhage. Since their professional debut in '87, Bucktick have always been on the cutting edge of innovation and experimentation. Never doing the same thing twice and always hungry for evolution, they pushed the limits of what was possible within the scene of Japanese music and opened doors for countless acts to follow in the future, being one of the founding pillars of Visual Kei, which saw immense popularity in the late 90s and early 2000s, as well as their intense popularity in Japanese media as well, with them being an inspiration for many, and even having a manga series based on their early years titled Hearts by Kumi Himeno, and as well with Sakurai being an inspiration for the character of Takumi in the manga series and anime Nana, although author Ayazawa denies this claim. And 40 years after their formation, they still continue on strong, with death itself not strong enough to halt the band's march forward, as the rest of the group has stated that they will continue as Bucktick and will proceed to record a brand new album in 2024. There are many details that were omitted for the sake of making this video less than 3 hours long, but I hope that this gives you a proper overview of this legendary group's vast career. From their beginnings as a group of bored high schoolers with a passion for music, to one of Japan's most influential figures in rock music, the history of Bucktick is nothing short of legendary, having influenced millions of listeners and inspired countless artists, genres and subgenres. Their impact in the world of music has been engraved for years to come, and I am excited to see what the world's busiest band has in store for the future. Hey, thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you've liked what you've seen so far, go ahead and drop me a like, and then subscribe if you'd like to see more like this in the future. I am a one-man machine when working on these projects, so it really means a lot to me when you guys show me your support. And once again, if you have any questions or if I missed something, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I read every last one of them, and I enjoy the discussions that are had. That's all for today.